Yes, I can. Thank you. So, good afternoon, everyone. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you all to our discussion with Mr. Kanamugire, Mr. Permanent Secretary Mure Kazaneza. I'd like to tell you just a bit about why this is such a great honor and opportunity for us. TCSPP, that is the Chicago School, has long been known for its innovative approaches to learning through community engagement. In the 32 years since our founding, we've grown from a handful of graduate clinical psychology students to now 4,300 students at 3 campuses and around the world, and we have 18 programs. We're now, in fact, the largest professional psychology school in our country, and because of our closeness to our communities, we're very well aware of our changing environment. In 2008, along with the introduction of the first PhD in international psychology in the world, TCSPP redefined its idea of community. We now know that it's not sufficient to prepare students for the neighborhood or the country that we already know. To us now, the notion of community means the world, and it means that we must prepare our graduates for the needs of the global community. And since then, we've been very committed to internationalization through academic partnerships, community service, education, faculty and student exchanges. And one of our most critical partnerships to the success of this outreach has been Rwanda. We've learned much from the country of Rwanda about resiliency, reconciliation, and peace. Through our liaison office and the opportunity to collaborate with the Kigali Institute of Education, we've learned more about programs that are needed and how to create a useful role for us in working with the rector to develop a guidance counseling program that will also foster joint faculty exchanges. We've learned more from the National University of Rwanda through our collaboration with Fulbright scholar Dr. Vincent Sezibera, who continues to work with us on faculty exchanges as well as collaborative training and research for genocide survivors. And we've learned more, even more, from the Ministry of Education, which has supported the Global Hope Training Initiative to train teachers to better understand, assess, and effectively intervene with children who have experienced trauma. We're very grateful to our partners for the relationships and experiences afforded to our students and faculty. We have a strong commitment to the country of Rwanda and will continue to remain committed to learning and collaboration. We hope and strive to do our part in Rwanda, and we are extremely grateful for what the people of Rwanda continue to teach us. So I'd like to thank Anjhula Mya Bais, president of our online student board, for making this remarkable opportunity for us to happen. Mure Koze, Mrs. Bais, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Breen. Much appreciated. Really quickly, before I introduce our esteemed guest, I just want to say that if any of the attendees around the world have questions, please address them in the chat box to me, Anjhula, and we will try our best to answer them in the Q&A after Mr. Kanamugire is done speaking. Otherwise, we also are trending live on Twitter, that you can tweet your question to @TCSOSB, hashtag Africa Speaks. And with no further ado, I just want to give a brief introduction to Mr. Kanamugire. He's worked as permanent secretary in the Rwanda Ministry in the President's Office, responsible for information and communications technology. In this position, he coordinated development and implementation of national ICT policies and strategies that form part of Rwanda's vision to transition itself to a knowledge-based middle income. Previously, he worked for 6 years as a Director General in the Office of the Rwandan President, a capacity in which he was responsible for advising the Rwandan government on technology policy and strategy. He holds a bachelor and master's degree, both in electrical engineering from Tshwane University of Technology in South Africa, and is currently pursuing his MBA at Manchester Business School in the UK. And David frequently speaks internationally on subjects of technology policy and African development. With no further ado, Mr. Kanamugire, a very big welcome to the Chicago School of Professional Psychology campus, and I hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, and Thank you so much, Dr. Brin, for that kind introduction and your commitment to the work and the people of Rwanda. It is indeed through such efforts that Rwanda has been able to rise and meet several challenges. So I would like to thank you so much. I would also like to thank Anjhula for kindly coordinating this meeting. I've been looking forward to it to share my views. And if you can hear me well, I'll just go on and show you my screen. Okay. So I'll start by introducing my interest in the subject of and trying to understand the dynamics that shape Africa's destiny, both in the past but also in today's information age. And when I spoke to Angel about this, we figured out that there are several people engaged in Africa, and Africa has always been seen or heard usually from various perspectives. So my interest first as an African who has a very keen interest in what is happening has been in trying to understand how different forces happen over time in different parts of the continent to create the situation that we find ourselves in, but more importantly, to look at how these situations and the dynamics that shape this development evolve over time, grabbing new opportunities and how we can overcome different challenges. And so I would like us to look at several forces that have acted over time at different places to create the current status of affairs in Africa. And then I would like to try to bring into perspective how some of these forces have created negative consequences. But we can't get stuck at that. We also have to look at the new opportunities that has emerged. And then we have to look at the challenges that still exist and how they can be overcome. And on this, I will share the case of Rwanda, how it has managed to overcome some of its challenges. And then towards the end, I'll talk about how I believe we can build new effective partnerships between West and Africa. So, sorry. So, can you see the screen?
Yes, we are able to see the screen.
So, okay, very good. So on the now let's look at how countries that own their development agenda can escape a historical trap. And we look at the new opportunities that are brought in by globalization and information technology and how this can change the status quo. So let's look at the dynamics. The dynamics that shape Africa come in different forms and shape. And if you look, if one who tries to understand the complexity of trying to understand Africa, and this is something that we come across when you travel in the West or you meet several partners, and there is a common misconception about what Africa is. Some people still view Africa as a single homogeneous entity, as if it is one country. And the policies that are developed are usually based on this understanding. So I will want to share some of the complexity of trying to understand how different factors shape Africa's destiny. And I have developed a very simple framework that I want to share with you that I believe will help us visualize better. And when you look at the complexity of understanding Africa. Here in Africa, we like stories. So there is a story of a rat, of a blind guy who prayed to God that if he could see one thing once, then he would have a better understanding of the world around him. And God thinking, well, that's a simple thing to ask. So you open your eyes and then you see something. So when this guy opened his eyes, he saw a rat. So from that time on, whenever people would talk of anything, his point of reference would be a rat. So he said, did you see that beautiful car? He said, oh, does it look like the other rat? Or did you see that tall building? You say, is it as big as the other rat? So one of the things we have seen when people try to understand Africa is like the story of a rat. Someone looks at Africa, one country, and kind of models everything else around that. So there are several ways one can look at to analyze African dynamics in today's information age. And I had a simple framework inspired by our hilly landscape. Those who might have been to Rwanda might have seen how Rwanda looks. It's very hilly, and I'll align my screen. And so this is how Rwanda looks, or most of it. It's very hilly, very green, and most of it looks like this. So I came up with a simple graphic to try to visualize how different dynamics take place in time and space. And I couldn't find anything better to think of than our hills. So you can see the undulating hills that extend far, deep. So because of living in these hills, we always look at tasks, either uphill or downhill. So you can see there is that truck climbing one of our mountains in Kigali, and you see a guy behind it on a bicycle. So when these guys climb up the bicycle, they get a push from the truck moving up because their bicycles can't move up. So this, in our opinion, looks at those forces that push Africa out of its situation, they drag it forward. But the other guys are not always willing to do that. So you can see somewhere here, people put spikes to stop these guys of bicycles from climbing. So these are one other forces that stop someone who is moving forward. But some people decide to go it alone. So they are not bothered by some of these things. So this, in a way, when I was driving in these mountains, I looked at this and thought about Africa's problems, and I would say, okay, so this can probably help visualize what Africa goes through over time in different places. So I came up with this simple graphic that tries to bring together how different factors shape Africa's destiny. So on this axis, you see time. These are events that happen across time, and each of these events have different influences. And so if you look at this single circle, think of it as the Africa trying to move forward across this gradient, this hill. So there are forces that push it, want to push it out, but there are also forces that want to drag it backwards. And there is some obstacle it might have overcome, but it also has some internal dynamics. So when we think of these forces and how they come together, you look at Africa with its own internal challenges that it has to overcome. It has external forces that must balance out. It has challenges that are out there. And when these bring together, they create some consequences. And these are the consequences we want to look at. So these are the dynamics. We have the internal forces. These, I'll explain more about these. And we have external forces that act in different times, different ways to shape how Africa moves from one point of development to another. And these happen over time. So we have a historical dimension that explains that we look at how Africa has been evolving over time up to where it is, and how yesterday's events shape tomorrow's today's and tomorrow's futures, but also the way these things interact do not have the same impact. So what happens in Mali, for example, the same event will not have the same impact in Rwanda. And we talked about the effort. These are real challenges that must be overcome. So the internal dynamics includes such things like culture. Africa does not have a single culture. There are several countries, I believe 53, with different cultures, different politics, religion, language, geography, demographics, and others. And trying to understand how these impact a country's development helps bring into perspective when one is dealing with Africa. We need to look at these things. We need to look at the internal dynamics and how it is going to shape that specific country's destiny. And then you have also to look at the external dynamics. So the foreign influence, how different foreign policies influence Africa. So Africa's development and its way of being of its people is not only determined by what happens inside, it's also determined by the foreign influence. And this can be traced also back in time, from the time of pre-colonization, during colonization, now and thereafter. So these are foreign policies, but we also look at some other factors like the economic forces. So in the past, Africa only traded with the West and internally within itself. Now we are seeing new developments of new trading opportunities with less stringent conditions coming from the East, places like China, India, and others. So that is the external dynamic. Now, you recall from the previous picture that some of these balance out. So we have some trade that takes us backward, we have another one that takes us forward. And then we look at the time dimension. Now, the time dimension, like the previous dynamics, occur over a period of time. And these shape the current status. So you look at the way the pre-colonial era events happened, shaped in how Africa evolved. And then the colonial era itself, and then the post-independence period, which mostly was responsible for weakening the institutions and societies. They may be, and all these things have consequences. So talked about that, how yesterday's events shape today's reality, and how what we do today will have an influence on tomorrow's possibilities. So in a way, we'll touch, that looks at what is being done today and how that has to shape tomorrow's opportunities. So obviously, when you analyze any place over time, you have to acknowledge this spillover effect from the previous periods. So these are the historical events, and we want to see how did these historical events come about, and to try to understand how Africa has evolved politically, its institutions, its status. One might want to look at this gentleman. He was a French parliamentarian. His name is Jules Ferry, who actually tried to bring out the basis of colonization and why he believed Europe had to be engaged in Africa. Now, it's very important to understand that the countries that had this type of colonization, the effects, even when colonization ended, and remember, this was in 1883. So this is a speech he gave on 28th July in 1883. But he wanted to explain the major continental interests that he believed was actually kind of a right. They say that it's not only a simple act of, say, let's go to Africa and colonize it. It was having to go with economic ideas, trying to civilize Africans. They believed they were not civilized, and introduce a new form of politics, new ideas of what he called patriotism. And this happened in most parts of Africa. So when you want to change all these things so fast, it's important to understand what happens to a country's ability to strengthen its institutions. So when colonialism happened, then these institutions in a way became weak. So even after independence, you had states that were not able to own their development agenda. And that in a way tries to explain why even after colonialism, you have so many dysfunctional states, dysfunctional leaders, and the countries still get trapped in that status quo. So the guy continues, and this is what he says. You can read it. He says, gentlemen, he's talking to his parliament, that I must speak from a higher and more truthful plane. It must be stated openly that in effect, superior races have rights over inferior races. So this was the conviction of this gentleman. And I picked this because this was more or less the common colonial mentality. So they believed that they are going to places kind of still uncivilized, and until they are civilized, then they might not develop. So, but that has not happened. So let's look at now at the space dimension. And the space dimension, we looked at those factors, the dynamics, that whatever, even if the same incidents happen, because of the vast size of Africa, what happens in one part does not have the same impact in another. But we have seen when some organizations or agencies pass policies towards Africa, they tend to be very generic. So if they say, I can give a case of World Bank, what they used to have a structured adjustment program, they say, okay, let's pass some kind of a new monetary policy that governs how African countries can borrow and lend money, and let's apply it unilaterally all of Africa. So without considering how different policies will influence different parts of Africa differently. So this is the space dimension, and there is more, we find that there is more strong external interest in resource-rich countries. So there is not one single kind of standard. We say, if I'm going to Africa, this is how people will react. Usually we find that in resource-rich countries, there is more interest and there is more influence and probably less ownership by those countries. So, and because of the legacy issues of colonization, we find that some states, even though they became independent, actually never owned their own development agenda. So they still live under a form of, they work on their development agenda on someone else's behalf. So they don't own it, and that has different consequences. So, the effort we talked about it is that each country is unique. It has its own sets of challenges. It requires a different amount of effort to overcome those challenges. And some of these challenges are not short-term. And we look at this when you look at such issues like education. I'll shortly talk about Rwanda, where you find several interventions have been on a short-term basis. But to build a sustained, developed society, some of the efforts required are long-term, and the results are not tied to budgetary cycles. So when we are engaging with development partners, their actions are always tied to a certain budgetary cycle. So, but if you want to build an education system, let's say develop secondary education, you have to be prepared to wait for a couple of years. So we find that this amount of effort, these different challenges have different impact. So these have created, these forces, these dynamics have created different consequences from which Africa is seen, or how it is right now. So one of the consequences have been a negative perceptions about Africa. And these negative perceptions have direct influences. One of the things they do, they block meaningful collaboration. So when someone is traveling to Africa, luckily now because of technology, it's no longer the case, but usually people had to first say prayers. If you're going to Africa, we pray that you come back alive and safe. So there is that negative perception of Africa being still in dark ages. So this is something that happens. And then one of the other consequences of the interplay of all those forces have been poverty. So this is a reality. But poverty should not be seen as lack of sufficient income to meet the basic needs. It should probably be seen both in that consequence of not having enough financial resources to meet your own needs, but also on the other secondary effects. It deprives people of dignity, that it deprives people of freedom to act and courage to face their challenges. So if a number of people have been trapped in poverty, then even any courage to get out of it and make an effort gets also reduced. So you find even if one person makes it, it takes much longer to actually get out of it. And another challenge we talked about was the weak institutions. Because of that lack of owning one's development agenda, is that some institutions, mostly here I'm talking about governance institutions in some countries, have become very weak. And one of the reasons they've become weak is still tapped to that kind of what I would call poverty mentality. It's like they do not believe that they have what it takes within them to confront the challenges. So in a way, they put up their hand and say, until some very kind donor comes, then only then will my problems challenge. And then even when the donor comes, we find the problems go nowhere because one, the donor does not understand the challenges this guy is facing. And even if you pour in resources, the problems go nowhere. So this problem of weak institutions is still tied to those previous consequences of not being able to stand up to the challenges of poverty and others. Then one other challenge, that a consequence of these forces have been lack of knowledge. The world has accumulated so much scientific knowledge and knowledge in other areas to address current challenges, but for whatever reason, this knowledge never trickled down to Africa. So you find even when there is sufficient knowledge about food production, and it's not a complex thing to know that if you have fertilizers, that if you bring a tractor, there is still land in Africa, we have rainfall in most parts, you can produce enough food. But building an effective knowledge system that brings together various knowledge sources from all over the world and put it to use in addressing these challenges has not happened so well. So there is a period, because of several reasons, that Africa has not accumulated sufficient knowledge to address its challenges. And as a result, because there is not sufficient scientific knowledge in Africa, and people who come to Africa to partner with Africa sometimes don't have sufficient understanding of the issues, you find the knowledge that exists in other parts of the world does not trickle down to address Africa's development challenges. So you find this huge knowledge gap that if people know how to treat a disease in one part of the world, this knowledge never trickles down. So people live with challenges on one side, others have solutions, and what comes is never knowledge, but only money. And even when this money comes, it also has. So our thinking here is that probably much as resources are required, knowledge is more important to understand how to address these challenges for a long-term sustainable period. So, but we say, okay, so that in a way has shaped or has created the situation that Africa is in, the interplay of all the forces we discussed in our infographic and the consequences this has created. And that some of these consequences are not only obvious on the ground, some of them long-term, some of them make people resign and stop making any meaningful effort to address their challenges. But that can't be the whole story. We also have had, there are new opportunities that have emerged. And I looked at a new face of what I would call a new face of Africa. You can see on this side, this is the report I got from McKinsey entitled Lions on the Move, the Progress and Potential of African Economies. So you can see that when one looks at Africa, different people look at Africa using different perspectives. So businessmen, this is an economic perspective where people look at the business potential, the economic potential of Africa. So you can clearly see that this is very different from Africa we've seen and heard and read about in papers. And the future looks even better. So one of the key drivers of this is technology and is the forces of globalization. All of a sudden, Africans are getting exposed to opportunities that were never before available to them. So you can see, you can look at these numbers, but one of the most important is if you look at the population that Africa is going to have by 2040 and how some of these people are going to be, 50% of them will be living in cities. You will now see the opportunities that are even going to be more created. So without question, the other forces of information technology and globalization also have had a positive impact on Africa. And this is going to continue up until the internal dynamics of Africa builds enough momentum to actually go above, overcome some of the challenges. So these are the impact of globalization, the emergence of new economic partners. When one talks about the new economic partners, we always consider the conditionalities attached to economic activities in Africa. So it's not that Africa started trading from time immemorial, but it has never really reaped the benefits of that economic activity. So usually it turns out resources and gets little money that sinks into large challenges and never develops anything meaningful. Now, the new partners build infrastructure. We see them investing heavily in different types of long-term sustainable projects. This was never the case. Usually, when you looked at how money had been coming into Africa, it was either for disaster relief or humanitarian aid. Little money has been going into development that are going to increase Africa's means of production. So this is happening now thanks to globalization, and this has also helped even some of the previous Western trading partners readjusting their model of partnership. So, and the declining monopoly of Western powers. And one other thing is that Africa has had an alternative market for its goods and services. So, information technology is one big force that is shaping Africa's destiny. So for a long time, we talked about how much that knowledge has never sunk. Now, technology is changing all this. We now have a number of Africans connected to telephony than ever before. And it would be very interesting to look at how this impacts people's lives. So up to the grassroots level, nearly in every village of Africa, a person at the village is connected to every other person wherever this person might be. So be it a family member in North America or wherever, Africans are no longer locked in their own villages. They are part of a larger community, and that has created opportunities. Now, if you consider the fact that Africa has a very young generation that is going to constitute a large working force, then this becomes a very promising feature. So several countries, Rwanda certainly has invested heavily in information technology by building national communications infrastructure, not only to meet current needs, but also to meet future demands for the future population. So this map shows how within the last probably 15 years or so, all of a sudden, we've seen a lot of undersea fiber optic cables connecting Africa to the rest of the world. So this is Africa's industrial revolution. And with it brings better education, better healthcare, trade, and others. So this is one of the great opportunities that is actually shaping Africa's future. And if people have been in Africa, you probably have seen what the young kids are doing in universities, in labs, building small online businesses, small activities. And this is a transition from where graduates only hoped to get jobs in government. Now we have most graduates wanting to join the service industry. And to us, we believe this is a shift in the Africa's labor force. So we can look at the challenges, we can look at the opportunities, but sometimes one can look at a case, and I would like to share with you how some of these challenges that we have discussed can be overcome. And I give a case from a place I'm familiar with, from Rwanda, where I come from, is that no matter how challenging these problems are, they can be overcome. And we look at the conditions necessary to overcome some of these challenges. Now, remember, this does not mean that the challenges have disappeared, but it means you have a systematic way of ensuring you are moving towards your own chosen path, and the people decide to move in that direction. And when that happens, then you start seeing progress. So this is a paper, I captured this. This paper was in Pittsburgh Post Gazette. It was on Friday, August 5th, 1994. So you can see the heading. It says, "Destroyed Rwanda has little going for it." So just to bring you a bit about the background is, in 1994, Rwanda had genocide, and the country was brought to its knees. So think of a small country that already was very poor, and now loses 1 million people, loses the key infrastructure, loses everything. So most people, analysts, believe that Rwanda would never recover. And that's because they say, well, even an ordinary African country is near on its knees. So a country that has had genocide, lost 1 million people, infrastructure, everything, this country will not recover. But we'll see how this has not happened. So this was an article still, as you can see. Rwanda is a nation that has been decapitated. So this was the general belief. And most Rwandans, no matter what had happened to them, they remained hopeful. They remained kind of reassured that it will be up and running. And this is when one looks at building that strong social capital, where no matter what happens, you still maintain hope and you work hard and you can get out of the situation. So this was an article that I got that highlighted kind of the challenges Rwanda has been going through. So you can see that it does not really matter how bad the situation is, but the determination to get out of it and the policies and the conviction are intangible power that you cannot equate to any amount of money, aid, or otherwise. So, but look at it a couple of years later. This was an article that appeared in the Global Post. Rwanda has not only moved forward, it has also actually registered economic growth. And why this is important is it's not only about the tangible economic benefit. It's like people who never had hope even if they did not grow by 1% GDP, they would have just been happy to survive. But they go beyond that, they build their lives, and actually they start seeing hope and progress, and the lives get better. So this was another article that looks at Rwanda, where it was and where it is. And this is another, you can see these are Rwandan troops, because of the conviction of what has happened to them, that some of these things should never happen in the world. So this is how Rwanda has moved. This was an article in the Congressional Record that shows how Rwandan peacekeepers have been trying to bring their past experience to see if they can help with some of the challenges, but most importantly, share the experience, because we are so convinced that no matter how bad things can be, if you have the right combination and understanding of your challenges, you can actually move forward. So you'll see here, this is doing business in Rwanda, is the top global reformer. So these are some of the underlying things that actually help propel Africa forward. And this, what is happening in Rwanda can and does happen in some other parts of Africa. And it's this understanding of, yes, things have been bad. There are reasons to explain why they've been bad. There are consequences which we must appreciate and accept, but we can't raise our hands. We have to do specific things to actually move forward. So this is what we consider to be the imperatives. Like I said at the beginning, is when so many factors come, development, in our view, is a complex phenomenon. I mean, you're looking at several factors at the same time. You're looking at the human aspects of development, you're looking at the economic, you're looking at the historical, you are looking at several factors. And this complexity, if you cannot understand it and you understand your challenges, then you actually cannot get out of these traps that are caused by either poverty or whatever could have been the cause. So we believe that investing a lot of effort in trying to understand the cause, the origin, the status of your challenges, and the context within which they happen is part of the solution. Then once you've gone through that stage, you understand why your kids are not going to school, why there is no sufficient health care. And I mean, someone can simplistically say that we don't have health care because we are poor. But then you can go back and say, why are we poor? And you say, oh, because we don't have. So until you can go back in time and understand critically what is wrong with the society, we believe any solution will just be cosmetic. And if you have gone through, so if you look, for example, you look at Rwanda, is like one of the key challenges all of Africa has been disease. Like people don't go to hospitals, and the reason is they don't have money. So, but then Rwanda devised a method. They say, how if one pays an equivalent of, let's say, $1 per year, can't we afford to take all our people for at least a degree of healthcare? Now, Rwanda has now over 90% of, we call it mutuelle de santé. This is social healthcare that at least the basic diseases that cause affect a lot of people can be addressed. And then the few that don't get it can be subsidized by those that are better off. So you can now have an entire society being taken care of. So that means you don't have a mother giving birth out of a hospital just because they can't afford it. So you make sure that every 10 people, you have one person and you appoint them responsible for community health care. And we say, until you understand the cause of infant mortality or others, then you actually can't solve it. So some of the solutions that have come are not resource intensive. It's just out of ingenuity of thinking, okay, if we don't have money to build schools, can people organize and on a weekend make bricks and build schools so that all our kids can go to school? So with that kind of approach, you kind of defy the excuses of financial limitations. So this work of owning your own agenda, but also that you need to be courageous to avoid distractions. I can say after the war in 1994, everybody had an idea of how Rwanda should evolve. Someone say, you know what, why probably not bring in tons and tons of food to support Rwanda 3 years? And then say, oh, maybe we actually need seeds. We don't need food. We don't need granaries. We need to get people back into the field and cultivate and build their future. So when someone, you give someone, you say, you know what, you're already hungry, I can give you food today. And these people become courageous. They say, yes, I'm very hungry, I probably need food today, but I'm more interested in seeds so that the next season and the season after, I don't need to be fed by you. And that kind of courage when you have a need. So remember, you have a need, but you have to be courageous enough and say, even when I have this need, this kind of thing is destructive. It's not really moving me in the direction I want. So to be able to achieve that, you need to own those processes. You need to own the development, and building institutions that are based at the grassroots level becomes very key, because it's not like you can sit there and prescribe a policy and think things have happened. These policies have to be owned at the grassroots level, the community level. So every 5 people need to know what it means to have healthcare insurance. They need to know what it means to take kids to school. They need to know what it means not to skip a vaccination program. And these have proved to be very effective in getting the whole country moving forward. So the strong institutions that before we said had been weakened, when people own their own development agenda, then you actually see a lot of people starting getting confidence and trust that things, their lives get better. And then another thing we look at is engaging in meaningful and long-term partnerships. Here I gave an example of partnering with global universities like Carnegie Mellon University. One of the challenges we have identified has been lack of sufficient skills to address challenges and not immediate. These are long-term development ambitions which cannot be addressed. So it takes a very long time to train someone to a doctoral level. So if we want to move forward and you find you have this gap, then you say, okay, since you have these skills, why not come to Rwanda and set up a small training program? And I would like to here thank Dr. Brin for her efforts with the Kigali Institute of Education and KIST and the National University of Rwanda. These are efforts that go a long way. They are much more effective in solving fundamental development challenges, probably than short-term humanitarian aid. Yes, we need humanitarian aid, make no mistake, for a crisis, but these crises aren't permanent. So when this is over, people need to have a long-term perspective about their future. So that is some of what we consider to be at the minimum to be requirements for any society to overcome these challenges. And so, yes, so how then, given this situation, how do we actually tap into the great opportunities, the knowledge, the skills, the resources, and partnerships to address these challenges? So I've given an example of one area that I think institutions, especially educational institutions, is to be able to provide those partnerships that help knowledge flow from where there is sufficient amount of knowledge about various areas to actually translating it into practical solutions that can address these challenges in Africa. So these types of partnership, I believe, are very effective. And the downside to it is it requires a lot of long-term commitment, because as you well know, if you're partnering in education, you don't say, well, I trained 1,000 people last week, now how come their income has not grown? So there is time for a long time for propagation of these benefits over time, but we believe it's the most sure way. So you have knowledge, you have skills, resources in one part of the world, but for whatever reason, they don't trickle down to address challenges. So it's like now you have people with lots of challenges, and then not effective means to address it. And that's why I started with knowledge, because I believe once people know what the challenge is, then resources can always be found, even if it's not sufficient. So it's not very difficult to transform healthcare of a single family or a village. And people usually look at such huge efforts, but usually what we need is few effective programs that help, even if it helps one individual at a time. Because when this individual gets back into society, he creates a very positive impact. So building knowledge skills is very, very critical. So Africans believe in markets. Markets have been part of our tradition. So if we have a market where you can go and fetch knowledge, then you bring it to address challenges of healthcare, of education of others, then we build more effective partnerships. And these partnerships sometimes have been constrained by organizational challenges, organizational politics, and other things. But we have seen very determined individuals who actually, because of their own conviction, have made a lot of effort. And this has gone on to build opportunities for lots of people. So even when I said Rwanda has developed and has overcome its challenges, we've had very, very effective partners who understand and say, okay, if you guys are serious about your issues, we will be with you while work with you. And that basis of trust, that willingness, okay, let me see what it is that you guys are trying to do. And that minimum trust, I say, maybe you're right, maybe you understand your challenges better than I do. Even though I have knowledge and skills, let's work out a new framework. So I think if people who are really committed, and I believe there are a lot of people committed, who have really worked with Africa, can devise different frameworks, different mechanisms of one, trying to understand the challenge, collecting enough knowledgeable people to deal on these challenges, and jointly we mobilize resources to solve these challenges. Some of these challenges don't even need a lot of money, but it's making sure that we can link one psychologist in Chicago with one family somewhere in Kigali and one hospital, and then you build this new network, and then create a pool of maybe a network or a platform where people can actually come and share experience, and if it works, translate it to another, replicate it to another place, and then to another place, and maybe. So I believe currently information technology gives us opportunities for better collaboration. So people's challenges can be shared better and matched with available skills and resources and the willingness of the people who are committed to working, building these partnerships. So I believe that is one way partnerships can be built. And certainly these partnerships should look at knowledge, at sharing the skills, the partnerships and resources, and then building some kind of, say, okay, mentoring people, because there are some challenges that do not have to be repeated if they have been solved elsewhere. So the sense of mentorship becomes very key. So we've had people like Anjhula who've been very active and engaged with us in Rwanda, and we see the impact it creates in people's lives. And I believe there are so many of those people who, once they pull together their skills, we build a critical mass of people who think about the challenges, who devise the skills required, who can mobilize resources and build partnerships. Remember, these challenges cannot be solved individually. So you have one person having a challenge, and you have another one working together with this person to create a new kind of solution. So in conclusion, I can say that while there exist challenges, Africa has a very bright future. And this is the conviction that most people have. We know things have been not so good, and people have reasons to explain lots of that. But the future looks bright because some of the shackles that held Africa back have actually been broken by forces of globalization and information technology. So when some African kid is in a university, it does not really matter where he is. He does not think as if he's in that place. He does not think of the background within. He thinks more globally. And these opportunities are creating new dynamics. Then new partnerships are really key to fast tracking some of these efforts being done. So we believe there is sufficient knowledge, skills, and resources to address some of the challenges that still exist in Africa. And this is good for the whole world. So because we all know, and that a better Africa, a better Rwanda creates a more prosperous world. It's a bigger market for all of us. So personally, I believe if one is going to live to be 80 and 90, God can't have given all those years to be used by oneself. We don't need so much individually. So we believe we have some spare time to use for community and for working with others. And then I believe the emphasis is on understanding the challenge before channeling resources. This is a conviction that we believe should happen. So without understanding the challenges, then it becomes really difficult. It becomes very difficult to solve any challenge, no matter how much resources you have. So thank you so much for your kind attention, and I now hand over back for questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kanamugire. I am assuming it's a little bit late in Rwanda, in Kigali right now, but I have a feeling, based on the questions that the audience members have been observing very much what you've been saying. And on a personal note, yes, I agree very much about, I think we share that philosophy in common that, you can start small and one person can really make a difference. So, thank you so much for mentioning that. I actually wanted to introduce you. We have the pleasure and privilege of actually having our Rwandan liaison officer, Dr. Tiffany Masson. She's actually the chairperson of the International Psychology Department, and she has spearheaded amazing initiatives such as telemedicine and train the trainer modules through her Global Hope program in Zambia and Rwanda. And I would actually, let me see if I can unmute her. One moment. Just a second. Let's see if I can get Dr. Masson online. Dr. Masson, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Anjhula.
Excellent. So please go ahead with any comments or observations or questions you would have.
Great. Thank you, Anjhula. I greatly appreciate it. And Mr. Permanent Secretary, Marakoze Neza, it was truly a remarkable presentation that evoked a lot of thought and questions for me. I've been working in Rwanda in collaboration for some time with key partners, really around our Global Hope Training Initiative, which is to train teachers through a Train the Trainer program, so really empowering the people in Rwanda to train others around the recognizing, assessing, and effectively intervening with kids that have been traumatized. And in large part, in my view, but I'd love to hear your thoughts and vision, I really believe that there is some power in psychology and the ways in which that contributes to human capacity building. But I would love to hear your thoughts about how you maybe have a vision for that or maybe not, and in the ways in which psychology could impact in collaboration the Rwandan people and help to build even larger and more robust sort of skill building.
Yeah, thank you very much. And like I said, thank you really for all the good work you're doing in Rwanda and in Africa. Like I said, I'm not very, I might say I'm kind of intellectually challenged in understanding the field of psychology, but I know that the more we understand about it, the more we understand about psychology, the better we can understand its application in addressing its challenges. So usually I say, whatever works elsewhere in the world will be very useful in Africa. And there is no difference except different income levels in how psychology can be put to helping people build better societies, better educational systems. But unfortunately, especially the case of one and others, we still have these cases, especially in building a critical mass of people who can specialize in psychology, understand it, apply it within their own local context. So if we know, I don't even know how many people there are that are professional psychologists, but it does not mean that Rwanda doesn't need them or Africa doesn't need them. What it means is that there is actually a gap in bringing out an understanding on what it can do for them. I remember, I look at a specific case when we were building fiber networks a couple of years ago. Rwanda had lots of challenges. Say, why do you even bury money in the ground? So people sometimes need a larger degree of exposure to even see new opportunities. And I would only encourage you to get more engaged and see how we have lots of interesting educational institutions that have psychology departments. So one way would be to directly engage with these departments because they also have an outreach program with the communities. And through working with university, through working with, probably come up with a kind of a professional organization, because at the end of the day, I believe it's the link with this knowledge that you possess to the grassroots challenges that exist that we only can come up with these practical solutions. So I would sincerely encourage you. So one, it's really doable, it's very effective, and the need is real. But being like psychologically challenged, not in the field of psychology, I would say I would not have specific knowledge in the subject. Besides my interest in Africa, my background is in technology. So, but certainly from my general understanding about the scientific need to build very knowledgeable skill base across several areas, that becomes fundamental to Africa's development and Rwanda's sustainability.
Thank you so much. You know, one of the things about why, at least in my viewpoint, the focus on trauma is that we know it has such a negative impact on children around concentration, focus, and academic performance. And the idea behind it would be that to train teachers to understand, recognize, and then intervene even in the classroom with children who've been traumatized will help them to increase their focus, to increase their academic performance, and in the end, be more apt to be contributors to society, and in that end, building the human capacity and capital of the country. But doing so not, you know, by me alone, but by training the people on the ground, as you mentioned, grassroots, which is so important, to train them, to train other teachers, to train other teachers, so that it is sustainable and exponentially grows over time. And to do that in collaboration with government, like the Ministry of Education, and to do it in a way that we're always assessing the efficacy of the program over time to make sure that we're doing right by the people of Rwanda and really meeting their needs and their agenda. So that's the idea behind it, but I'm interested in your thoughts about that, and then I'll pass it back to Anjhula.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Mr. Kanamugire,
Yes, please.
we wanted to know, some of the students have asked, would you be willing to share your PowerPoint slides?
Yes, please. No problem at all.
Okay, wonderful. And then there was one more question. Some of the students wanted to know about internship positions or further information in terms of working there in Rwanda. What would you suggest?
Well, I think it would depend on the specific area that they would be interested working in. And certainly, once we know which areas they are interested in, these opportunities can be arranged.
Okay, so perhaps we can speak at a later time about chalking out different sectors and maybe how we can have a sort of collaboration between TCS and Rwanda, because I think, as we can see from this call, both faculty and students share quite a passion for the country and are very, very interested. And I know a lot of, well, several, I'd say, African women have been in the forefront of taking leadership positions or being heads of state. Do you have any comments on women in leadership in Africa?
One thing is actually you need to look back in the history and see the role of women in African societies generally. African women have always had a very strong role in Africa. So we had people like queen mothers who were very powerful. But in the case of Rwanda, the imperative for having women in government and even setting up a high percentage is a simple statistic. Women constitute over 50% of our population. So you really cannot have a country develop when half the workforce is not engaged. So it's just a numeric thing. It's a very logical thing. So we find societies that do not promote women cannot actually make any progress because so they are cultural things, but somehow, somewhere, women never participated effectively in development. They lacked education opportunities. But Rwanda recognized this need and made deliberate efforts, said no child should fail to be given opportunities, and certainly women should have an active role. So currently we have our parliament has the majority of women, I think, globally. But what is more interesting is the number of women active in productive sectors. So you find you go in small and medium enterprises, you go in universities, you will find a very active uh, uh, population of women in all spheres of life. So personally, and someone from Rwanda, it's part of our belief. It's a belief system. You cannot develop sustainably when half your population is disengaged, and it cannot be on say, well, if you want, it has to be very genuine engagement of every single member of community to be able to develop. So these results, you can't sustain them when you don't have everybody engaged. Like I said at the beginning, a country that understands its challenge, and its challenge is mobilizing all the people to work the talk. So my view is that yes, it's very imperative. Women do play a very critical role, not only in economies, but even in their families. So women that are educated, that are better support their families, you find they don't have issues of, because in Africa, women play a motherly role, they play an educator's role, they play a caretaker role, they play an economic role. So if you lose all those benefits, then you actually can't develop. So for us, it has been simple recognition that it is an imperative. You cannot develop unless everybody is engaged.
Thank you, Mr. Kanamugire. I would agree with that as well. And I think slowly but surely the world doesn't have a choice but to listen to, half its population and things like the 1 billion woman revolution all these things that are taking effect, hopefully we'll see change at a very fast rate. I know we've gone a little bit over time, but I just wanted to ask two more questions that have been asked of me, and just curious about, would you agree that there is a stigma of psychology in Rwanda, and what would you say are ways to overcome that? And number two, what would you say about the concept? I mean, I know you touched upon it a bit, but and you've mentioned it, but what would you say about the concept of resiliency? Because it is something the whole world is looking at Rwanda to. It's absolutely amazing. And what would you attribute that to?
Well, let me start by the last question of resilience. I think one of the key things is coming to terms with reality and not wishing that there was an easy way out. So once you are confronted with real challenges, you have to actually say, wait a minute, this is the situation I'm in. I wish I might not have been in it, but this is the situation that I'm faced with, and therefore I have to face it. So you actually don't know how strong you are until being strong is the only choice. So like in case of Rwanda, the resiliency was built because of confronting the challenges and getting people to say, wait a minute, this is all that could happen. The worst that could happen has happened. I can only move forward, and I'm willing to confront my challenges. So with that comes a lot of effort. The first thing is you start shedding off the barriers. Like if forgiveness becomes a challenge, say, well, I will forgive so that I can move forward. If poverty has been an issue, say, I'm going to confront it. And people refusing to give up when you are confronting these immense challenges. So in case of Rwanda, you found people becoming very strong. And one other thing I can attribute it to is value system. One of the things that is probably taught not only in Rwanda, I believe in many other cultures as well, is refusing to give up just because there is no easy way out. And that values, that way, that is taught to us from birth, that yes, things are tough, they could have been better, but you do not necessarily have to take the shortcut. So the ability to build a very strong value system, the ability to know that you don't have the worst that could happen has happened. There's therefore you don't need to fear anything anymore, and then having hope and believing that it can happen. And that strong belief, probably you're in a better position to explain it from a psychology perspective, is that we find the drive does not come from outside, it comes from internal conviction that people with the right attitude can overcome their challenges. So I would say it's a combination of factors, some of it cultural, but some of it individual strength and support amongst families. So the families give mutual support. And then we have support communities, but that does not mean that people overcome the problems equally. Some actually get stuck, but overall the society moves forward. So we still have individuals who might be suffering at an individual level, but overall you avoid getting the whole country being trapped into its past. So we say we can't be taken hostage of our past. We acknowledge it, but we move forward. So the second question about the stigma of psycho, I actually don't know much about this one. So I don't know how, I've never truly understand whether there is stigma or how much of it there is. So I really don't know much about this.
Well, that is something we can maybe leave for the next discussion on ways to approach it. Because one thing that's interesting is the last time I was in Rwanda, there is a law, I believe, if it's still up to date, that if you've been diagnosed with a mental condition, you are not allowed to vote, which is very interesting. So I think we can leave that for a dialogue part two, Mr. Kanamugire,
Yeah,
if that's okay with you. I know it's getting very late
yeah.
in Kigali, but I think I speak for Dr. Breen, the president of the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. Dr. Tiffany Masson, who does so much work, and her heart and mind is definitely in Rwanda. And for all the students, because they have been inboxing me in the chat box saying, wonderful, wonderful speech. Thank you so much for taking time out of your hectic schedule. And we hope that you actually make it to the Chicago campus very soon. And we hope to keep the conversation going. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and it's really been a pleasure. And thanks to all of you for the great work you're doing and for the great partnership. It has really been an opportunity for me to share our experience with you. Thank you so much.
Take care, everyone. The recording will be available on the online student board page, and join us for our next speaker. We will be emailing you about that in our speaker series. Thank you and take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye.